In recent years, we have witnessed numerous attempts by well-known YouTubers to change their career trajectory, often towards the music industry. Such popular personalities as KSI, RiceGum, Codyco, Jake Paul, and Sky Does Minecraft sought to leave the YouTube platform or expand their opportunities in other areas of creative expression. Even Rich Brian, originally known as a vlogger on Vine, has found his new role as a musician. However, many of these YouTubers are still perceived through the prism of their past, which creates certain obstacles on the way to recognition in the new industry. The fact remains that most of these transitions have not been as successful as the YouTubers themselves had hoped. In one of the videos, blogger Stacey Kane mentioned that verifying the transition from a YouTuber to another role is often accompanied by stigma. Even when a YouTuber achieves some success in a new field, he continues to be perceived in the context of the past. For example, it's hard to imagine PewDiePie in a feature film because he will always be associated with YouTube. Even KSI's music, despite his aspirations, is still associated in the minds of many listeners with his activities as a YouTuber. However, one person who managed to make the transition with maximum success is George Miller, better known as Filthy Frank, and now Joji. His path to fame in the music industry has no analogues among other YouTubers, and his story is an excellent role model for those who intend to change their field of activity. George Miller's official position on his decision to leave YouTube is that he no longer enjoyed creating content and that medical reasons forced him to take this step. In his statement, Miller pointed to the stress-induced seizures that he suffered from, stressing that continuing to operate in the same way would be dangerous for his health. "I was recently diagnosed with a brain condition that ironically causes me seizures," he said. Despite this, many still wonder if there were other, deeper reasons. When analyzing his departure, there are several theories. One of them is that he has banally outgrown his old goals. At the beginning of his career, he dreamed of reaching certain heights, but gradually the achievements on YouTube stopped bringing him the same emotions. Perhaps he was also unhappy with how the apocalypse on YouTube destroyed his income and views. Or perhaps political correctness, which has been gaining momentum in recent years, has had a negative impact on its content, which is known for its provocativeness and ambiguity. The feeling of stagnation and dissatisfaction is not uncommon in the careers of creative people. It often happens that achieving a long-awaited goal leads to emotional exhaustion and loss of incentive. When Filthy Frank had 100 subscribers, he dreamed of 1,000. When he reached 1,000, his new target was 10,000. And so on, until he finally realized that quantitative achievements did not bring him the desired satisfaction. This feeling of stagnation and dissatisfaction is more pronounced among those whose activities require a high degree of creativity and emotional involvement. However, George Miller's path and his transformation into Joji show that sometimes drastic changes are needed to preserve one's creative energy and find new ways of self-expression. The story of George Miller is a powerful example of how you can successfully overcome a professional and personal crisis, find new challenges and not lose yourself. His journey from mad comedian Filthy Frank to successful musician Joji demonstrates the importance of inner honesty and willingness to change. In an era when every second aspires to become an internet star, his story serves as a reminder that real success is achieved not only through popularity, but also through a deep understanding of their own desires and needs. The world of social media is full of success stories in which young creative individuals struggle through numerous difficulties, achieve fame and recognition, and at the same time often face the need for radical changes in order to maintain their creative energy and relevance. One of such vivid stories is the path of George Miller, known under the pseudonym Filthy Frank, who radically changed his role, moving from creating comedy videos on YouTube to a serious music career under the name Joji. Filthy Frank is not just a character, it's a phenomenon. George Miller created a world full of absurdity, humor and provocations, which quickly gained popularity on YouTube. His show featured a unique mix of comedy, parodies and musical inserts, which made him recognizable and extremely popular. The pinnacle of George's success as Filthy Frank can be considered the creation of memes that have become iconic for an entire generation of the internet, for example, the famous Harlem Shake. However, behind this public image was a man who was experiencing internal contradictions. Over time, George began to realize that his activities on YouTube no longer gave him joy, and moreover, was detrimental to his health. The diagnosis of stress-induced seizures was an important factor in his decision to change the direction of his career. But there were other reasons that pushed him to take this step. One of the key problems faced by successful YouTubers is the transition to another field of activity. Why is it so difficult to move from one form of creativity to another? One of the reasons is the perception of the audience and the industry. For example, many well-known YouTubers, such as KSI, Cody Ko and Ricegum, try to pursue a musical career, but often faced the fact that they continue to be perceived as YouTubers, and not as serious musicians. In the case of George Miller, he managed to make this transition more successfully than many others. Under the pseudonym Joji, he began to create music that was appreciated not only by his old audience, but also by music critics. Joji was able to offer something new and unique that set him apart from other former YouTubers. Unlike many of his colleagues, he managed to erase the stereotypical perception and create a new name for himself on the music scene. Why did Filthy Frank stop? One reason may be that George has outgrown the goals he set for himself on YouTube. This phenomenon can be described as a desire for constant growth and new challenges. When a person achieves one goal, he automatically sets himself a new, even more ambitious one, but over time this process can become a vicious circle, leading to a feeling of stagnation and dissatisfaction. This can happen in any field of activity, and YouTube is no exception. George Miller was no exception. He has achieved a lot, millions of subscribers, cult memes, recognition and fame. But at some point he realized that it did not bring him any more satisfaction. In an interview, he explained that he felt like he had achieved everything he could on YouTube, and it was time for a new challenge. The transition to music became for him this new challenge and a way to overcome creative stagnation. For George Miller, the transition to music was not only a change in creativity, but also a change in the perception of himself. He no longer wanted to stay within the absurd and eccentric image of Filthy Frank. He was striving for something deeper and more emotional, which found expression in his new music. Joji became the personification of this new stage in his life, where he could explore new facets of his personality and creativity. Another important aspect of this transition is the realization that any creative image has its limits. PewDiePie once expressed the opinion that George left the stage at exactly the moment when it was necessary, since the memes and images created by Filthy Frank could begin to lose their relevance and freshness. This realization allowed George to leave at the peak of his popularity, leaving behind a positive legacy and not turning into himself a parody. The story of George "Filthy Frank" Miller, who became Joji, is a vivid example of how important it is not to be afraid of change and strive for new heights. It shows that success is not an end point, but only a stage on the path of personal and professional growth. George Miller's career serves as an inspiration for all those who seek to go beyond the usual and find their true vocation in life. This transition from one creative role to another was not easy, but in the end it led George to a new stage in his life and career, where he was able to express himself on a new level. This is an example of how, despite all the obstacles and difficulties, there is always an opportunity for growth and change if you are ready to accept the challenge and move forward.